Don't forget to unmute, Paul.
All right, do I have Rick Bennett's face before you?
And we can hear you too.
You are seeing the right one. Okay.
Yes.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to greet you again this evening for hosting the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Is a weekly pleasure that I've been enjoying for a year and a half. And to be able to have the return of a number of speakers throughout that term and have you all appreciate the remarkable diversity and genius that is expressed is part of that fun. There are some new people on the list tonight, and I would call to your attention that if you'd like to continue with the forum, whether on a regular or irregular basis, if you'll give your email to Robert Cook, he is our technology expert, and he keeps the list for those people that get the regular mailings. I would also call to attention that we commonly allow the speaker, the presenter, at least a few minutes to present before we start interrupting. We try to avoid interrupting until after 45 minutes or so, but then we commonly open it up for a forum that is open for question and answers. And this evening, I'm sure we're going to be enjoying that because Rick Bennett comes to us from the Gospel Tangents. He is the host and creator of the Gospel Tangent podcast, where he interviews scholars in the fields of Mormon history, science, and theology. He's hosted a remarkably broad range of perspectives, and for us to incorporate our Book of Mormon perspectives and have him back again, of course, makes him an altogether appropriate person to be presenting tonight. He's had church officials, prominent critics of the church, people like Sandra Tanner, as well as Locke Mackay. While our forum focuses upon the Book of Mormon, Rick has hosted constructive, balanced, interesting discussions with a diverse range of perspectives and on a broad range of LDS-related topics. We welcome him this evening to address schismatic Mormon views on the Book of Mormon. If you would join me in prayer. Nope, not moving. There we go. Let us pray. Intellecti of the universe, whose plan extends beyond our terrestrial grasp, we bow in awe before you in prayer, in awe, in humility, hands clasped. For we recognize our dependency for food, for drink, for breath, and see in you a plan for us, transforming us beyond death. To have the delight of life with you and the promise of immortality exceeds the hopes and dreams of most, yet blesses our mortality. For the hope it gives each day one lives helps make it through our sorrow, encouraging us to cling to you as our benefactor today and tomorrow. This evening, our forum bows on Zoom to hear from Brother Rick Bennett, whose gospel tangents expose us to perspectives on each intricate gospel tenet. And we want to understand the scripture as a means of understanding you. So we ask for your blessing to help us ascertain thoughts and tenets which are true. Our world has so much turmoil, wars in Africa and Ukraine, and we ask that you help us join our faith with those who would bring peace again. And we pray for all your good people beyond those whom our arms can clasp, that your kingdom soon be realized with its eternal grasp. In the name of the Prince of Peace, we pray, amen. And if I can get the turn off. Somehow. Got to find out how to get you off. There you are. Whoop. I'm sharing and trying to unshare. All right, I think I got the stop share finally, and so Rick Bennett, the floor is yours, and thank you for coming to share with us again.
You got on mute, Rick. Please.
Oh, there we go.
There you
Oh,
go.
I'm glad I said, can you guys hear me? And then you said unmute, so that's good. All right, well, let's see if I can share my screen here. Can you guys see this here?
Yes.
All right, so we're gonna go on a tour of the restoration. It's been fun for the past 6 years. I've been talking to people from a lot of different groups. I'm trying to, there we go. And so some of my favorite people to talk to are pictured here: John Hamer, Neil Bringhurst, and Steve Shields. They've written some great books on the topic of the restoration. John Hamer and Neil Bringhurst on the left put together Scattering of the Saints, Schism Within Mormonism, which is a fantastic book. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that cover in just a moment, because it's not just a bunch of cool little circles. It has some pretty cool explanations. It's not comprehensive, though. If you want a comprehensive history of, or a very encyclopedia of Mormonism, you've got to get the book Divergent Paths of the Restoration. So Steve Shields, he's a member of the Community of Christ, as most of you probably already know, and it's available there. It's actually electronic version only. The book is so large they couldn't actually get it into a book, and so it's kind of nice to have it in electronic form, because you can search, and there's over 500. He doesn't like to use the word schisms. I'm going to use it, but so he refers to them as expressions of Mormonism. So 2 fantastic books, and all 3 of these guys are probably smarter than me. So I'm just kind of relying on their expertise, but as well as some of my own interviews and as well. So I want to talk a little bit about John Hamer's book there. John's an amazing graphic artist, and he's actually color coded these groups. And so if you look at the top, you'll see, I don't know if you can see my mouse at the top there. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah, we can. Yep.
Okay, so you've got Joseph Smith Jr., and you'll notice that's a blue circle in New York, and then just below it you've got Joseph Smith Jr. as a green circle in Kirtland. And the idea between the color changes is these represent theological differences. And so you can see that any of these blue circles, like Warren Parrish, Wycombe Clark, and John Whitmer, have tried to return back to the original New York style theology. And so you can kind of see here, as Joseph moves down here, come down the main trunk of this, well, it's not really a tree, but kind of whatever octopus thing here, then it turns to a kind of a light green in Far West, and then orange in Nauvoo, and then you can kind of see these big circles here. After Joseph Smith dies, the 12 take over, and then Brigham Young in this main branch takes over, and then John Taylor, and they're kind of some red and yellow. And then we go on to Gordon B. Hinckley. Of course, he was the prophet of the LDS Church when John finished this book. And so the idea here is, when you look at these colors, you can kind of see which branch. So over here on the left, you've got James Strang, which is kind of a pinkish color, and then he turns into kind of more of a purple color. And you can see he's got some breakoffs here. Joseph Smith, as we go back to, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how. So there's not a direct connection, which is kind of interesting in this thing. If you go from Joseph Smith to William Smith, and then Jesse Briggs, and over to, this is the kind of the RLDS branch, and you can see a lot a lot of these innovations here, they've kind of returned back to the Kirtland era theology. That's why those are more in green. In the blue, you have kind of the Sidney Rigdon group where they're trying to get back to New York, and William Bickerton and that sort of stuff. And so anyway, it's not just a bunch of cool colors. John's really thought about this a lot. And over here in kind of the army green, you've got William Draves. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk to anybody. I do have an interview scheduled with a guy named Adam Stokes, but that'll be maybe in a future presentation to talk a little bit about this branch. That's the Elijah message branch, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, yeah. So blue, green, orange, pink, and then brown. That's kind of the main sort of colors. And you can see when we get into the dark red, those are really kind of some of the polygamous groups as well. So moving on, this slide comes from John Hamer. It's a fantastic slide. And so want to talk first about, we're going to talk not only about early schisms, but we're going to talk about later schisms of the recent past. And so you'll notice these green and brown and orange and yellow, these match the colors that John was representing previously. So he's got 9 possible successors of Joseph Smith here. Of course, the LDS Church, the Brighamites, and the RLDS Church, the Josephites. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I think we're all pretty familiar. Most of us are either LDS or RLDS here, or are very familiar with those. So William Smith's kind of interesting. He joined with several groups. He joined with James Strang's for a time. He started his own church for a time and ended up in the RLDS Church. There's a link there, I believe that was with Stephen Shields that I talked to a little bit about that. William Marks had a claim to the succession, but he first supported Sidney Rigdon's claim, and then he ended up joining the RLDS Church. David Whitmer's church is no longer extant, and I believe it lasted up to the 60s, if I remember right. Lyman White, he's another quite a character. He's in brown here. His church is no longer extant. Now, I put a little yellow line here because this is where I'm going to start talking about some of these people. So I had a really interesting interview with Mel Johnson to find out more about what we kind of call the Whiteites. And you'll see with all these churches, a lot of them use the same names, and so that's why we refer to the LDS churches, the Brighamites, the Josephites, and the Williamites, and the Whiteites, and everything, because it just makes it a little bit easier to say who was the person that kind of started that branch. Some of the others were James Strang, Sidney Rigdon, and William Bickerton. Rigdon's on here. Bickerton kind of took over. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Alpheus Cutler, and then there's one that's not pictured, but I wanted to put it on here. And that's Granville Hedrick, and he was with the Church of Christ Temple Lot, which, if you're in Independence, you're probably familiar with them. So when I look at this slide from John Hamer, Granville Hedrick really didn't have a claim to leadership as these 9 all had some sort of a claim, and so. But Granville Hedrick, well, I'll talk about him in a minute, but he knew Joseph Smith. He was baptized just before Joseph Smith's death. So we'll move on. First one here that we're going to talk about, and these aren't in any particular order, is Lyman White. A lot of times we refer to them as the Whiteites. And so he was an apostle. He spent some time in Liberty Jail with Joseph Smith. And then when Joseph Smith died, he had been commissioned to first go to Wisconsin, and then once he was done with Wisconsin, Joseph had directed him to go to Texas, and of course Texas wasn't a state as we are now; it was a republic, so he went to Zodiac, Texas. So most of this information I get is from Mel Johnson. He's a wonderful historian, and he wrote the book, The Life and Times of John Pierce Hawley, a Mormon Ulysses of the American West. Now, most of you, in fact, when I first interviewed Mel, I'd never heard of John Pierce Hawley. He's kind of an interesting character because not only did he join with the Whiteites for a time, but then he left and joined the Brighamites in Utah. There's a questionable tie to whether he was in the Mountain Meadows Massacre or if his gun was used and he wasn't there. But then he left the Brighamites and joined the Josephites, the RLDS Church. So he really had quite a view of three different branches of the Restoration. So um, he founded the city of Zodiac, Texas, which is no longer in existence. It's near Fredericksburg, Texas. He was ordained an apostle in 1841. And then Brigham Young kept trying to get him to come to Utah, and he was said, "No, Joseph Smith sent me to Texas. I'm going to stay here." And so then he kind of became the president of what he called the Church of Christ from 1844 to 1858. After his death, many of his followers ended up joining in the RLDS Church. One of the amazing things to me and to Mel was John Pierce Hawley built the first temple west of the Mississippi. It was the Zodiac Temple. Of course, the building's no longer in existence. It's been torn down. But the RLDS Church actually owns the temple records where they performed Nauvoo era endowments and sealings. And so Lyman White was a polygamist, and he believed in polygamy. And so if you want to know more, I don't want to spend too much time on here, but I've got a link there to my interview with Mel Johnson. And of course, he gets into LDS history and RLDS history too. So that's a very interesting interview. And it's the only one I've ever known about was where anybody knew anything about Lyman White. So that's kind of a fun interview there. The next person we have is James Strang. And so we often refer to them as the Strangites. So James Strang is interesting in the fact that on the day that Joseph Smith was killed, James Strang claimed an angel ordained him to be prophet on the night of Joseph Smith's death. So there's also kind of a letter of ordination that is a little bit disputed. But at any rate, so James Strang started what he called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which sounds a lot like the LDS Church. And so you can see why it's why we're trying to refer to these as Strangites and Brighamites and things, because it just makes it a little bit easier. The one difference between his church name and the LDS Church name is the LDS Church has a Latter dash small d day, and there's a Latter space day. That's the only difference in the names of the spelling. And so James Strang first was on a mission in Vory, Wisconsin, when, or near Vory, I guess. That's kind of where the congregation is now. Joseph had sent him on a mission to establish kind of a settlement there. And then after some time, he migrated back east to Beaver Island, Michigan. And so James Strang, in a lot of ways, imitated Joseph Smith. He translated several plates, including the Vory plates and the Book of the Law of the Lord. There's another one that my name's escaping me right now. But so he translated several books of scripture. He initially rejected polygamy, and then when he translated the Book of the Law of the Lord, it said that he embraced. He said you could have up to 4 wives, and so that was the limit, was just 4 wives. William Smith, I think, kind of influenced him. The early church leader John C. Bennett was also part of the Strangites and probably encouraged him to embrace polygamy. He was assassinated on Beaver Island, Michigan, and the adherents were scattered. A lot of times in the LDS Church, we talk about the pioneers and the deprivations that they faced, but very few know that the Strangites suffered severe persecution. Strang was shot, and he lived a few weeks before he succumbed to his wounds. And but he never named a successor. So one of the interesting things, because he didn't, Strangites no longer have any apostles or a prophet anymore. This picture here is with Bill Shepard. He's a high priest, kind of the leader in Voorhees, Wisconsin, and a wonderful historian. He's a former JWHA president, John Whitmer Historical Association president, and just one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. Some interesting things about them: they worship on Saturday. They're Seventh-day Sabbatarians, I think they call themselves. They don't believe in the virgin birth. They believe that Joseph was the father of Jesus, so that's pretty interesting theology. There are actually three main groups. Of course, they all claim to be official Strangite groups. And so technically Bill's just in one of the three Strangite schisms. And I've got several links there that you can learn a little bit more about the Strangites. So, but they're still in existence. They still meet weekly, and Bill is a super great guy. Next group we have is the Sidney Rigdon William Bickerton group. So of course Sidney's on the left, William Bickerton's on the right. We often refer to them as the Bickertonites. And Daniel Stone is an amazing author. He's kind of the Richard Bushman of the Bickertonite groups. He's recently got his PhD in history, and he's a wonderful fellow too. Just very enthusiastic. So the Bickertonites are based in Monongahela, Pennsylvania. Basically, just to back up a little bit, when Joseph was running for president, he asked Sidney to be his vice presidential candidate. And there's an electoral college rule where it's advantageous if you don't live in the same state. And so Sidney established a residency near Pittsburgh. And so he was in Pittsburgh when he received news that Joseph Smith had been killed. So Sidney came back to Nauvoo, and Brigham Young at the time was on a mission in Massachusetts, I believe. And so the apostles gathered. Then there was kind of a famous meeting where Sidney wanted to be the guardian of the church, and Brigham said no, the 12 are going to take over. And then everybody voted, and most people sided with Brigham. Sidney went back to Pittsburgh and started his own church, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion. I think it got up to about 300 in the congregation. William Bickerton was one of those converted by Sidney Rigdon, but Sidney was very erratic, and that's probably why the people in Nauvoo didn't want him to lead, because they knew how erratic he was. And so after a few years, Sidney basically just kind of quit leading the church. And so William Bickerton kind of took over the pieces. William was a former coal miner there. And there was a time where actually William Bickerton did join the LDS church for a very short time. I think it was about 9 months. And then in 1852, when Brigham Young and Orson Pratt announced that polygamy was an official doctrine of the church, then William Bickerton said, "Nah, I'm not going to be part of that." And so he kind of picked up the pieces of Sidney Rigdon's church. And so what I understand is they believe that Joseph Smith was the first prophet, Sidney Rigdon was the second prophet, and then William Bickerton was the third. It's kind of an interesting story. They, even after William Bickerton took over, they kind of had a little bit of a schism. William was accused of adultery, or I shouldn't say adultery, inappropriate relations with a woman. Basically, he was alone with a woman and got accused of adultery over that. And Daniel doesn't think that it was actually an adulterous affair, but it was kind of scandalous. I believe William was about 60 years old, and this woman, Tryphena Taylor, if I remember her name, was about in her 20s. And so William didn't see any problem with that, but people were like, you shouldn't be alone with a woman. So the churches actually split there for a time, and a guy named William Cadman became the leader of the Bickertonite church. And then eventually William Bickerton and William Cadman kind of reconciled, but the idea was William Bickerton no longer was the leader, it was Cadman. And so in a way, the Bickertonite church has kind of erased William Bickerton, even though he was he was the guy who kind of kept Sydney's church going. So they claim to be the third largest Restoration church, I believe about 10,000 members. They still practice speaking in tongues to this day. I know Steve Pineacre has attended some of their services in Florida. I was going to go over spring break, but my travel plans just were terrible. And so I need to, I know they have a congregation in Florida. I know they're big in Michigan. And that's where Daniel lives, in Detroit, and Monongahela, Pennsylvania. I believe they have a congregation in Arizona, and I'm gonna make it out there because I want to attend. Steve said it was quite a lively group, and I definitely want to attend. It sounds like a lot of fun. So some of the highlights: Alice Cooper, and they might have Alice Cooper's grandfather. It might be Ether Moroni Fernier, which how much more of a Book of Mormon name can you get than that? So Alice Cooper's grandfather was the church president for a time. Alice is no longer a member of the church, but he was raised with the Book of Mormon. They strongly believe in the Book of Mormon. They do not accept the Doctrine and Covenants anymore, although William Bickerton really was a big proponent of baptism for the dead and Joseph Smith's Civil War revelations. And so, but they don't believe in the Doctrine and Covenants anymore. So I've got a couple of links there to some other interviews that I've done, especially with Daniel Stone. So Daniel is pretty amazing. So the fourth one here we have is Alpheus Cutler, known as the Cutlerites. And so this is another interesting group. If you're there in Independence, you're probably familiar with this group. They're just a few blocks south of the Independence Temple. Unfortunately, I was out there. I've got some pictures that I wanted to share. So they were reorganized in 1853 by Alpheus Cutler. That is their church / temple. From what I understand, the main floor is the church, and then the upstairs is kind of their temple. So Alpheus Cutler, they're called the Church of Jesus Christ, and oh, by the way, the Bickertonites are also called the Church of Jesus Christ. So it's the exact same name, and you can see why it's very, very hard to keep these straight if you don't use another kind of a naming convention. So Alpheus Cutler left Brigham Young to start the Church of Jesus Christ. I believe it was April 6, 1853, although I saw another thing that said October. So that date might not be correct, but that's what I understand. They once had a congregation in Minnesota, but they're down to about 9 total members. I've got a picture of 2 of those members, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. His wife was Virginia Lane. She gave me a tour of their church. Maybe I'll jump ahead there really quick. So I got to see the Cutlerite Chapel. From what I understand, if you can kind of see, there's a little bit of a line here. I think they've got a baptismal font in the floor. At least that's what I've been told. But it's a very small building. But Virginia was just one of the friendliest people. I asked her if she would be on a podcast, and she would not. So I'm telling you all of this from memory in my congregation with her. And, you know, a lot of historians are like, wow, you could talk to a whole religion here. There's only 9 members. Most of them are getting up in age, but they do have, and I can't remember if it's Virginia's grandson or somebody else's grandson in his 30s that lives in Colorado. They're not concerned about dying out. If this grandson marries somebody, he could maybe keep it going. But they just meet together, you know. So one of the interesting things, they're one of the few, I will say, non-polygamous groups that actually still believes in temple works. And so they do practice sealings and endowments for the living only. She told me that there's no marriage in heaven, so they don't do any endowments or sealings for the dead. They still practice baptism for the dead, however, and they are strongly against polygamy. So I've got a few other interviews with, I think, Stephen Shields and can't remember who the other one was with there that talk a little bit about the Cutlerites. So anyway, that's kind of the inside of their church there. Topic 5, Granville Hedrick, known as the Hedrickites. And so Granville was was baptized in 1843, just a year before Joseph Smith's death in Woodford County, Illinois. He joined with Brigham Young for a time, and then had a revelation, well, that they were supposed to return to Missouri, and that they were going to get the temple lot. So they're known as the Church of Christ Temple Lot. So they actually own, well, this is one of the interesting things. They actually own, originally Joseph Smith had planned 24 temples in both Independence and Kirtland. And, but they own the original lot. Let me see, I'm going to skip ahead of here a little bit if I can find it. Oh, I must not have put it in there, darn it. I can't believe I didn't put that picture in there. There's a picture they have where they're laying out the people are standing around the foundation of the original temple in Missouri that of course was never actually built. But so Granville Hedrick was ordained an apostle by Hiram Page and became leader of the Church of Christ in July of 1863. The interesting thing is, even though he had the revelation to return to Missouri to claim the temple lot, his brother, and I can't remember his brother's name, actually returned and bought the land where the original temple lot was. And so they actually tried to rebuild the temple in the 1930s, and then the Depression hit and they just didn't have any money. So most of this information I'm getting is from R. Gene Adams. He's a LDS, but he's probably the best expert on the temple lot. Once again, when I spoke to them, just like with the Cutlerites, they did not want to speak on camera, but were very friendly. They reject the Doctrine and Covenants in favor of the Book of Commandments. They occasionally practice speaking in tongues. They have apostles that lead their church, but often drop below 12. I believe they're less than 12 right now. Their original building has been burned twice by arson, which is just terrible to me. And there's a link to my interviews with Gene Adams. This is a picture of the first Church of Christ Temple lot, the first building from 1889 to 1898. This picture here on the right is interesting because this is the son of Granville Hedrick standing in front of that original building. You can see how small it was. And so that one burned, and it was by arson. I think it was an irate member of the congregation that burned it down. Back in the 30s, they tried to build the temple lot, and you can see there's a big hole here, and they were putting in the footings here. Bishop Alma Frisbee, they've got a picture of here. They found 2 of the original stones that were used to mark I believe the cornerstones, or at least some sort of markers for the temple that were laid, I won't say by Joseph Smith, but probably Oliver Cowdery or whoever, the Whitmers, I think were big there. And in fact, this one has a W on it. I'm sure that's one of the Whitmer brothers probably marked that stone. So it was very sad. They decided to build this, and then the Depression hit. One of the most famous residents of Independence is President Harry Truman. And so the interesting thing was they just had this gigantic hole. And of course, when he was president in the late 40s, I believe. And so when he was returning to independence, the city said, "We don't want to have this eyesore anymore. We'll pay to fill in the hole," because they didn't want Harry Truman to see this ugly hole. And so the city, because they didn't have any money to even fill in the hole, and so the city paid to have that in so that Harry Truman, when he returned from his presidency, wouldn't see this big ugly hole anymore. So that's kind of interesting there. So this is their new church. You can see the picture on the top right there. It was about 1990, if I remember right, somewhere around there. A disgruntled former member with mental issues set fire to the church, and so that's the church that burned down. It's since been replaced. This guy here, Randy Sheldon, is an elder. His father, I think, was William Sheldon. He was an apostle, I think one of the head apostles. I wouldn't be surprised if Randy becomes an apostle in the future. But they were very fun and very nice. And of course, they have a nicer church now than they've ever had. And so that's nice. So that brings us to kind of some modern schismatic groups. So these aren't in any particular order. Mostly, originally I was going to be like the order that I interviewed these people, and so so we'll jump in. I see there's some people in the chat. Let me see if there's anything. Oh yeah, Johnny Page. Okay. So anyway, all right. So let's talk about. Oh, I need to fix my slide here. Okay, so the first group that I'd like to talk about is the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so I interviewed Jim Van Cannon. This is kind of interesting because even within this, we've gotten a schism. So Jim Van Cannon was a former counselor of the Remnant Church of and is now, they've had a schism, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now he's the prophet of the Everlasting Church of Jesus Christ in the latter days. So the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is basically an RLDS breakoff. They started in 2000. Frederick Larson was the first prophet, and they believed in lineal succession. Fred Larson is a descendant of Joseph Smith. They were strongly against female ordination in 1984 when the RLDS Church allowed women to be ordained. A lot of people were very upset. And the Remnant Church is just one of many independent branches, especially there in Independence. I like to think of the Remnant Church as kind of old style RLDS, where they were not only strongly against polygamy, but they still believed Joseph was a monogamist. One of the big things in their group is they're trying to restart consecration. And you can see my link there. They had a succession crisis following Fred Larson's death on April 26, 2019. Fred was in his 90s when he passed away. And the current president is Terry Patience. It was kind of interesting because I was watching this live on Facebook, and it was like Brigham Young versus Sidney Rigdon on Facebook Live, and you could kind of see the back and forth. It was just really interesting to watch that secession crisis. And so I know there were some very hard feelings between Terry and Jim, and I've been trying to get both of them back on, but I haven't been able to get them on yet, but I'm working on that. So anyway, that was just interesting to kind of see, just like with the Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon, the president of the Quorum of the 12, took over like Brigham Young did, and then Jim split and started his own church. Another group are what we call independent polygamists. So on the right here, you can see Ann Wild. She's an independent polygamist. And on the left is a guy named David Patrick. I'll talk more about him because he's not independent. He's affiliated with a different church. But the independent polygamists are probably the largest. They're larger than any one single branch, and probably even bigger than, say, the Biggertonites, I would say. They don't have any official structure. One of the interesting things about independent polygamists is, in the LDS church especially, we talk about lines of authority, and one of the arguments with the fundamentalist Mormons, if I could use that term, is that priesthood is independent of the church. And they point to the fact that Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery received the priesthood before the church was organized. And so they use that idea. And so when a person gets excommunicated, say from the LDS church, that they believe that doesn't stop their priesthood authority, especially when a lot of the early polygamists got their second endowment or second anointing, and so with that, they believe that gave them the power to seal anybody. And so you can hear, especially in LDS history, that a bishop would seal two people at a dance together because he had the sealing power. And Brigham Young wanted to really rein that in. And so he said, no, you can't do that without my permission. So at any rate, Ogden, Ann Wild's husband, Ogden Kraut, he's highly influential among all polygamous groups, writing 65 books. David Patrick, he's an apostle for Christ Church, and we'll talk more about his group in just a minute. But he thought it would be great to have an episode to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the publishing of the book Jesus Was Married. So this is a first edition book here, and the current edition by Ogden Kraut that is still very, very influential among polygamists. So Anne was Ogden's secretary for a while. They were secretly married. It's kind of interesting. I don't know exactly when Anne, she doesn't want to say, but as you put, because Ogden was excommunicated, I believe, in the 1970s. And Anne was secretly married to him for more than 30 years. Ogden, I'm trying to remember when Ogden died. I know it was before the year 2000. And Anne started a group called the Principal Voices, which was to try to promote polygamy as not a terrible lifestyle, as a lot of people think. And I believe it was her activities around the 2002 Olympics, when the Olympics were in Salt Lake City. She was granting a lot of interviews, and I think that's probably when she got excommunicated. So anyway, I've had her on a couple of times. This was the second time with that book. So she's very knowledgeable, has ties to pretty much every polygamous group, and she's very interesting. Third one I thought we could talk about is the FLDS Church. And so they're also a Brighamite breakoff. Now, one of the interesting things about fundamentalist Mormonisms, and of course I'm talking about Brighamite breakoffs here, of course, the FLDS Church was not formally organized until 1984. And Rulon Jeffs is Warren's father. He was the first prophet, and he knew Gordon B. Hinckley as a young man, which I thought was pretty interesting. So following, and even before Rulon's death, Rulon was kind of suffering from, it sounds like dementia, that sort of thing. And so his son Warren took over leadership, and Warren is currently in jail. That's a picture of his mugshot from Texas, I believe. Or it could be in Utah, I'm not sure, because he's been arrested both places. In Utah, he was able to not be convicted, but it was in Texas. So he moved from Texas from Utah to Texas. There was a big raid at the YFC. YFZ stands for Yearning for Zion Ranch. They have an FLDS temple. It was actually a false report that led Texas authorities to raid the temple. They separated their children from the parents, and he's currently in a Texas jail for assisting in the rape of a child, Elissa Wall. Elissa was 15 years old and was, so one of the interesting things about the FLDS church, which is very different from the other fundamentalist Mormons, is Rule and Jeffs really like the idea of one man rule, and a lot of the other fundamentalists believe, well, if you've got the sealing power, then you can seal anybody, and as long as the sealer believes that you can marry two people, then that's fine. And so Rulin really wanted to consolidate that sealing power and have what's called one man rule. And so Warren abused that, and really he would say, so for example, Elissa was supposed to marry her cousin, who was, I think, 2 or 3 years older, that she hated. And he was just, there's a book, I'm trying to remember what the name of the book is, but Elissa wrote. And it's a terrible, terrible situation. So Warren is still leading the church from jail. The church is really in disarray, and Jeffs is still excommunicating people from especially men from jail. And their church has really fallen on hard times with Warren in jail. So Lindsay Hansen Park is kind of my expert on that, and I've got a link there to that interview. She's great on everything, but in our interview we talked a lot about FLDS church. This is another terrible story. We're going to do about 3 terrible stories in a row. This one's in the news lately. Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Don't believe they're polygamous as far as I know, but they're an LDS breakoff based up near Rexburg, Idaho. They're part of the prepper movement, where they're into end times and have your guns ready, and the world's going to end at any time. And so Chad Daybell was an influential writer of visions prior to his arrest. Chad and Lori married soon after both of their previous spouses were deceased under suspicious circumstances. Lori's first husband was killed by her brother, which is kind of weird, and then her brother died. They have some really strange beliefs that children were possessed by devils and became zombies. I think Lori's child was autistic or something. And anyway, the children were missing for months. Lori and Chad got married and did a honeymoon in Hawaii, and everybody was like, "Where's the children?" And they were like, "Oh, they're fine." But the bodies were discovered buried on Chad's property. So just recently in the news, Lori has had her legal status changed from incompetent to competent to stand trial, and trials of both of them are to take place soon. I interviewed a guy named Christopher Blythe. He's a professor at BYU, and he kind of talked about that. So it's a very unpleasant story. I know we've got Under the Banner of Heaven. I don't actually have them in here. There's another story about Jeff Lundgren. He is an RLDS breakoff, a very similar sort of story. He believed that the story of where Nephi killed Laban authorized him to have a hit list, and so he had a hit list of several prominent RLDS leaders. He killed a family of 5 in Ohio, and was never remorseful at all. He was executed by lethal injection in 2006. I have an upcoming interview with Bill Russell from the Community of Christ, and he's going to give a few more details on that story. Bill's really interesting because while he loathes, I don't think that's too strong of a word, Jeff Lundgren, he's also strongly against the death penalty and actually testified in an attempt to save Jeff from the death penalty. But of course, he was executed back in 2006. There's a link to Bill's Sunstone talk. I think it's from 1993, where he talks about this story of Jeff Lundgren killing this family of 5 in Ohio. So time to move on to happier topics. The remnant movement. So we've talked about the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ, which was Jim Van Cannon and that group. Well, this is the remnant movement with Denver Snuffer, not to be confused. The Remnant Church with Jim Van Cannon is a RLDS breakoff or a Josephite breakoff. Denver Snuffer is a Brighamite breakoff. One of the interesting things is Denver says that God didn't ask him to set up a church. And he doesn't like to be called a prophet, even though he basically functions as a prophet. So Denver was excommunicated in 2013 over the book Passing the Heavenly Gift. He claims to meet with Jesus often. He has published his own version of the Bible. Got a copy on my shelves here somewhere. Where sometimes Joseph would give sermons and he would say, well, this scripture means this. And so Denver would take those and add what Joseph Smith said into his version of the Bible. So it's like the inspired version of the Bible that the RLDS use plus. And so they've recently published that. So Denver's had many revelations. He rejects DNC 132 and many other revelations. He used to be more LGBT friendly or polygamy friendly than he is now, but he claims that God has told him that those things aren't of God. He now believes Joseph was a monogamist. He didn't used to believe that. In fact, we talked about that in my interview with Denver. And one of the interesting things about Denver, because it's not a church, you don't have to quit your church to join his movement. He is talking about building a temple one day. He's based here in Sandy, Utah, not far from my house. Very friendly guy. And so he's kind of, this has just been since about 2013 that his church has started. Another breakoff is the Reborn LDS Church. So this guy in the red shirt here in the middle, guy named John Pratt, he was the guy I interviewed. Interesting thing about John, he joined with Denver, and he's a descendant of Parley P. Pratt, and so John Pratt is quite an interesting character. This person on the left here holding the gold plates here is Mauricio Berger, and he's based in Brazil. And he claims that the angel Raphael came to him, ordained him a prophet, and gave him the actual gold plates that Joseph Smith had. And so you can see these are loose pages, but over here, they're bound pages. And so he has translated a portion of the sealed plates. And I know he's been in a lawsuit with the LDS Church because they don't want him to refer to it as the sealed Book of Mormon. And so they've got you can download a copy over the internet, but they're not supposed to sell the sealed portion due to a lawsuit. But anyway, there's supposed to be, I joked with John because John told me in the interview that he was to be a witness of a second sealed portion that was going to be translated. Well, the unfortunate thing is I interviewed John last summer. It was June or July. And I told John it was going to take me some time because I'm always slow getting these interviews out. It's a lot of work. And he passed away in October from COVID. And unfortunately, he wasn't vaccinated. So he was not able to be a witness for this second sealed portion. And so I was really sad to hear that. But I've got a link to that interview. He talks a little bit more about Mauricio Berger, and John's an astrophysicist. One of the other interesting things is he thinks that he's figured out that the first vision took place on March 23rd, if I remember. I think that's the right date, 1820. He's made some calculations and on some calendars and sorts of things. But anyway, so um, so that's the Brazil group, the Reborn LDS Church. The House of Aaron. So this is kind of an interesting group because they are very, very loosely affiliated as a Brighamite breakoff. So they were organized in the 1950s by a guy by the name of Maurice Glendenning. So Maurice hailed from the Midwest, and his wife had asthma, and so they were trying to move west, and accidentally ended up in Salt Lake City. And Maurice had several visions and revelations about the 12 tribes of Israel, and a lot of people in the Midwest just thought he was kind of crazy. And so when he got to Utah and they were talking about the 12 tribes and the lost tribes, and he fit right in. They were like, "Hey, join the church," and so he joined the church, for the LDS Church, for a short time. But then he kept having these visions, and he really liked the LDS idea of consecration. And so they moved out to central western Utah, right on the Nevada border. It's very remote. It's a long drive, and so they've started a consecration society. So one of the interesting things, especially here in Utah, when you talk about consecration societies, a lot of times you think that that's tied up with polygamy, but not with this group. They not only strongly reject the polygamy, but they no longer believe in the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants. So they're more of Messianic Christians. I was out there last fall, I think it was, and they were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. And so they celebrate a lot of the Jewish holidays. They worship on Saturday, on the seventh day. And very friendly group, very small group, probably 50 to 70 in their community, I'd say. And you technically don't have to be a member of their church if you want to participate in consecration. So this person here, John Conrad, he's the leader of the House of Aaron. His father led before him, and then before that was they referred to Maurice Glendenning as Bishop Glendenning. So they kind of still use some LDS terminology. I'm trying to remember, there was a vision where it was either Nephi or Moroni that appeared to Maurice, and so they kind of still have some ties, but they don't claim to be Mormons at all. They don't claim to be really affiliated with the LDS Church at all. But there's definitely some influence with this group. So a lot of scholars kind of consider them a restoration group, but they don't consider themselves a restoration group. So they're fun people. The next group we have is Christ Church. So I mentioned David Patrick on the right here. He's the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and Benjamin Schaefer on the left in the green. He is in the Quorum of 70 for Christ Church. They are basically a Brighamite breakoff. They believe polygamy is a very important principle. Both David and Benjamin told me they're personally monogamists, but they really support the idea of polygamy. They support the Adam God doctrine, and so that was kind of interesting. And they refer to it as kind of a pyramid. They've got this pyramid temple. They've actually got two of them. One is in southern Utah. I want to make it out there. And then the other one is in Nevada. I'm trying to get the temple matron on my podcast, but she's very remote in Nevada, so we'll see. But they're very interesting. As you can see, they dress normally, not like the pioneer of the FLDS church. They were founded in April of 1978, just 2 months before the LDS Revelation on Priesthood in June of 1978. And so they're very, I hate to say normal, but they seem very normal, especially when you compare them to, say, the FLDS church. I know David's a financial advisor and Benjamin's a lawyer. So you can see more at that link there. Next group we have is the Church of Jesus Christ in Christian Fellowship. So this is Christine and David Farriman. They are co-presidents and co-prophets. This is another really new group. They are basically a Brighamite breakoff. They're based in Ohio. David had his first revelation in 2015 and started the church around 2016. They basically, well, they're different than Denver Snuffer, but like Denver Snuffer, you can be a part of their movement without leaving your church. So you don't have to quit your church to join them. Right now, they only have internet services. They don't have a physical location, so they will hold a sacrament meeting. They're also kind of Messianic Christians, kind of like the House of Aaron. They celebrate a lot of the Jewish holidays. They ordain women. They have what they refer to as the Melchizedek priesthood for men and the Magdalene priesthood for women. In the Aaronic priesthood, they have, of course, the Aaronic priesthood for men and the Miriam, no, yeah, I think that's right, Miriam priesthood for women. So they are very open to LGBT members. They allow polygamists to join. They allow lay members to receive revelation. They have an extremely open canon. They'll even accept non-Christian scripture as, like, if you believe something out of the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or, you know, any book of scripture that speaks to you, that can be your personal scripture. So they're very, very open to lots of different revelations. And I think they're pretty small still, but they claim to have members from all over the world. That's just one of my recent interviews that I just published. The next one, this one I have not published yet. I know Steve Pineacre's had a Matthew Gill on, and I haven't been able to listen to that one yet. But so this is Matthew Gill. He's the prophet of the restored branch of Jesus Christ. He also had a lawsuit against him. So he's an LDS breakoff. He resigned, I want to say back in about 2005, based in, we would say Derbyshire, but he says Derbyshire, England. He was also ordained by the angel Raphael, similar to the Brazil group. He's translated some plates and claims that Jaredite relatives built Stonehenge. So he's translated the book of Jeranek and a few other books of scripture. He's firmly against polygamy, believes that Joseph Smith was a monogamist. One of Matthew's earliest revelations came when he was only 12 years old. In 2005, he had an angelic encounter and resigned from the LDS church. Mostly, it sounded like he didn't like the way that the sacrament was being passed. He says they have about 15 to 20 members, but 20 to 30 follow online services. So he's kind of an internet church as well. And I was just starting to edit that this past weekend here. I'll probably have that up in a month or two. And so he's very interesting. He's got other books of scripture besides the book of Jeranek. And and then the website for his church is restoredbranch.com. All right, and now I'm going to finally finish up here with some other polygamous groups. I haven't actually I've been trying to get Cody Brown on, but he's part of the group called the Apostolic United Brethren. They were started by a guy named Rulon Allred, and they're the most famous member is Cody Brown and talked a little bit about them. Following the third manifesto in about the 1930s, that's kind of when the All Red group started the Apostolic United Brethren. Of course, they believe in polygamy. They're a lot of times, like if you watch the show, especially when they lived in Utah, well, to be honest, I found Cody Brown's house. It's only about 3 miles from my house. They, unlike the FLDS church, they look very modern. You would not be able to distinguish them from a regular LDS member if you didn't know that they were polygamous. So Anne talked a little bit about them at that link. The LeBaron group, Ervil LeBaron, he had a hit list that included the president of the LDS Church, Spencer W. Kimball, his wives actually killed Ruin Allred, who was part of the Apostolic United Brethren, and he shot at Gerald Peterson, who is a member of Christ Church. This is in the 70s. Ervil died in prison. Anne, I remember when I asked Anne a little bit about Ervil LeBaron, she said, "Oh, he was at my house. He sat on my couch." She thinks he might have been doing some reconnaissance on Ogden Kraut, her husband. And she said, but he used an assumed name. And she said, if I'd have known who he was, I would have been really scared, but he used a different name. So anyway, he was a bad guy. They actually have a group in Mexico. You probably heard, well, it's been 3 or 4 years now, about a Mexican drug cartel that targeted some Mormon polygamists. It was the LeBaron group. It's just kind of a crazy story. So anyway, the LeBaron group, they're just kind of out there. And then the last group that I want to talk a little bit about is the Centennial Park group. So the Centennials Park were part of the FLDS, and they split from the FLDS over one-man rule. I kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. And so the FLDS and the Centennial Park have a real rivalry because they were, they're basically cousins, and their communities are close together. So they kind of had to like separate communities. So anyway, Anne talks a little bit more about that. So if you want to know more about these, I can't recommend enough both John Hamer's book, but Stephen Shields' Divergent Paths of the Restoration. It's got over 500 restoration expressions, and the book includes both new and extinct groups. It's only published as an ebook because the book is so large they just couldn't get it into print. It's published by Signature Books, and I've got a link there. If you have any, I'll open it up now for questions or confirmations or questions, and you can contact me. I'm not very good on Twitter, so if you're a Twitter person, it would be better if you emailed me. So anyway, I'll stop sharing and open it up for any questions that you guys have.
Well, thank you, Rick. I claim that first priority because I get to be the host. There was only one of your groups that I saw that didn't use the Book of Mormon. And
Yeah.
if I recall correctly, when we had Josh Gailey of the Monongahela group, he indicated that they had the Book of Mormon in 22 countries. So there's really quite a range of Book of Mormon respect, use, activity. To what extent is the Book of Mormon considered sacred in Scripture? Well, I mean, how do you account for all these differences? And when people have the Book of Mormon as a commonality?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've nailed it. The Book of Mormon is the glue that ties all of these groups together. I don't, Mormon, when you look at broader Mormonism, I have an upcoming interview with Jesse James. He teaches at Graceland College. And he said, when you look at Christianity as a whole, every group breaks off. And I remember what he said was for one little stupid thing, like, well, you're not doing the sacrament right, or you're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right. And I think that's why all of these groups, I mean, to me, polygamy is a big issue. And so when you look at I mean, the LDS and the RLDS church, that was the whole reason for the schism, was whether to embrace polygamy. And the Book of Mormon pretty strongly rejects polygamy. And so I can completely understand why the RLDS church, for example, rejects polygamy just based on the Book of Mormon, and they reject the DMC 132. And so when you look at to me, that's a big deal, the polygamy question. But when you look at all these other groups, like William Bickerton, he joined the RLDS church, or excuse me, he joined the LDS church until Brigham Young announced polygamy, and then he's like, well, I like Sidney Rigdon's theology better, so I'm going to go with that. And so it kind of goes back to the kind of those colors. You can kind of see Joseph Smith was constantly innovating, and you can see that people are breaking off and they want to go back to the blue group or the green group or the orange group or whatever. And a lot of times that's over polygamy, but it can be over other things as well. So, but yeah, the Book of Mormon definitely is what ties all these groups together. And since you mentioned the House of Aaron, that's why they don't really consider themselves a restoration group, because they don't believe in the Book of Mormon. So.
Okay, well, let people to raise their hands. The little signal down at the bottom to react will allow you to raise your hand, and then Deb does a good job of keeping track of the order so that we can have questions organized. All right, I think Steve is up there first with his hand up, and so I'll intrude for that one.
And then Bill, you'll be next after Stephen.
Okay, so real quick, Josh Gately likes, I think actually the Church of Jesus Christ has about 25,000 members. And he likes to point out that they are the second largest Book of Mormon believing church in the Restoration. I just thought that was kind of interesting, that people say that. But
is that a dig at the RLDS church?
Well, no. Well, that's just a joke that he likes to talk about, because a lot of people, of course, know that the RLDS, or the Community of Christ, has moved away from the Book of Mormon. I also want to point out, this is the Book of Jeraneck, or this is included in the Book of Jeraneck, and this is one of the few copies in stateside that exists. Excuse the green screen. Rick, I'm going to put you on the spot if you don't mind.
Uh-oh.
So I was, when I interviewed John Hamer, he goes and he says, like, my favorite group is the Strangites. I really like them, outside of his group. And then afterwards, we were talking about the Church of Jesus Christ. And I said, and he said, you know what? I really like the Church of Jesus Christ too. And I should have said that in the interview. So I'm just going to ask you a question, Rick. Outside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who's your favorite group?
That's like saying, what's your favorite ice cream? I can't pick. I don't know. I love Bill Shepard. I think he's amazing. I love Daniel Stone, like two of the most Christian people I've ever met. I love my RLDS cousins, Locke Mackay, John Hamer. Like, how do you pick? They're all just outstanding Christian men, and I, the Cutlerites, Virginia Lane, like I'm gonna be like Will Rogers here. I've never met a person from the Restoration cousins that I haven't liked. Like, seriously, they've all been extremely kind to me, extremely welcoming, extremely friendly. So I'm gonna dodge. They're all awesome.
Oh, dude. Okay. Well, just one follow-up. So you've engaged all these different groups within the Restoration. What was your biggest surprise? Just talking to these different groups that really, maybe as somebody just like didn't know a lot about the other groups and you're first engaging them, just what's been some of the things that you've been surprised by engaging these other groups within the Restoration?
Well, once again, just how welcoming. I mean, even in this group, it's funny because I can talk to our LDS group before I can talk to an LDS group. You guys are way more welcoming to me than even my own church. Just how welcoming everybody's been. As far as surprises, Bill Shepherd really surprised me when he said that the Strangites believe that Jesus came through natural processes, that Joseph was the father of Jesus, and that Jesus was a man. And I was just like, wow, because that's pretty heretical, Another big surprise from the Bickertonites was, I had heard that Alice Cooper was a Mormon. That was a pretty big surprise when I first found that out. The whole idea where I wasn't surprised that there was a schism with William Bickerton and William Cadman. But I was really surprised that William Bickerton swallowed his pride and said, no, we've got to combine back together, and was just just an elder. He was not in leadership, but he did that to reunite the Bickertonites, which I just thought was amazing. I don't know many people that could do that. So yeah, those are probably the two biggest surprises. The Cutlerites. Like I remember when I drove by and I'm looking in the church and I'm knocking on doors, nobody's home. I see this guy mowing his lawn. I was like, do you know anything about this church? And he goes, oh, those people, the lane, they had just driven in the driveways. They're the guys who take care of the church. Mr. Lane he's the deacon, and he's the one who kind of takes care of the yard and everything. And everybody's just been so welcoming and so nice. So that's kind of my biggest thing. So.
Yeah. Stephen, were you done?
Oh, yeah, I'm good. Thanks,
Okay,
Rick.
thank
Love
you.
Good.
Bill, go ahead. You got to unmute, Bill.
There we go. Rick, all of these institutions are based on revelation or special messages from the higher power. So what conclusion do you have about revelation?
It's not very reliable.
Is there anybody who's right?
Well, it just reminds me of Joseph Smith, when he said, all these churches saying low here and low there, and which of all of them must be right? Or, it feels like the same thing Joseph Smith was going to. I'm partial to the LDS Church because that's my heritage, and that's the one that I'm sticking with. But I love some of the things the RLDS Church is doing. Even David Fairman with the Fellowship of Christ, I think that's kind of their short name. I love how inclusive they are. And I know that a lot of people in my church would not like the fact that they're that inclusive, that they'll allow polygamous and LGBT and whatever. So I don't know. I we're in the land of Joseph Smith once again. Low here and low there, which of all of them is right? And you just have to pray and do your best, and hopefully.
So there's no one true church.
Well, my church doesn't believe that. But when you look at Joseph Smith especially, and I remember Richard Bushman said this, Joseph Sr. was kind of a universalist. And if you look at especially the LDS Church, let's say, everybody's going to be LDS anyway. All you guys, we're doing baptisms for you guys, and you're all going to join in the end anyway. So we're all going to be one big happy family. So.
Well, it's interesting. I belong to a chorus up here in Minneapolis, and we sang for a Baptist a funeral, and son of a gun, I felt the Holy Spirit in that service.
Oh, absolutely.
So what's
The
true?
LDS don't have a monopoly on the Holy Spirit. I guarantee you that. I felt the Spirit in lots of different churches. I haven't been to a Bicker Tonight church, but I can't wait. And Steve, I'm coming to Florida. We're gonna go. I promise. Because I just wanna do that. But I mean, you know, where 2 or 3 meet in my name, the Spirit can be there. And whether you're Baptist or Hindu or whatever, you know, God, the sun, the Spirit is like the sun. It shines on everybody. The rain too. You know, I mean,
I like that idea.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm finished.
Thanks, Bill. Lori and then Mark. Go ahead, Lori.
I think, Lori, I think you're muted, but I think I see your question, but go ahead.
Yes, I have the 2 questions. Would you explain the one-man rule? And would you explain consecration societies?
Okay. So the one man rule, I'm glad you wrote them there, so I'm not going to forget. One man rule, the idea especially with Brigham Young, and even among the fundamentalist Mormons, Brigham Young didn't like the idea. In fact, this is the funniest thing. Didn't like the idea of anybody just marrying anybody. So, for example, I had an interview with Bruce Van Orden, and he was the biographer of W.W. Phelps. And W.W. Phelps went to, I think it was Boston, if I remember right, and he found a couple of sisters, and he just married them because he had the priesthood, and you can just do that. Well, when Brigham Young found out, he excommunicated W.W. Phelps for like 2 days and then rebaptized him and said, look, you cannot just marry anybody. You got to get my permission first. And so the idea was, you know, one man rule, like this has to be coordinated. And so like another way to think about it, and I would assume that it's this way in the RLDS church. If I just want to baptize my son in the ocean or the lake or wherever, and I didn't tell my bishop about it, my bishop wouldn't recognize that baptism. And it's the same way with a marriage sealing. If I just marry some woman and I don't go to the temple or I don't go to wherever, the church isn't going to recognize that. And so the idea with one man rule is all of this has to be coordinated through one man, Brigham Young. Now Brigham Young can delegate it to the stake president and the bishop and whatever, and you know, and you go through your bishop's interview process and you do that. So it's not like, you know, like, well, I'm married, but if I were not married, it's not like I had to go to Russell Nelson and say, hey, can you approve the marriage of me and Wendy, my wife? I mean, we go through the chain of command, and that's fine. But the idea here is the buck stop with Russell M. Nelson or Stephen Veazey in your church or whatever. Somebody there has to be an order to this. You can't just be like W.W. Phelps. Hey, I'm going to propose to you, and I got the priesthood, because some of them would do that. You know, in fact, I remember there was a quote from one of Wilford Woodruff's journals where he said some doughhead of an elder would just marry 2 people because he had the priesthood. That's not right. Like, you got to have order, and so that's been one of the big problems with well, at least from Rule and Jeff's point of view, was he wanted to have this order established, because with the fundamentalists, you know, they would get their second anointing, which would include the sealing power. So you know, the first anointing is kind of the LDS temple endowment ceremonies, and the second anointing most people don't get. Like it's like the super secret thing, and hopefully I'm not getting in too much trouble for talking about it, because this is like super secret. But the idea was, if you got your second anointing, you had the sealing power. Now, under Brigham Young, you were still supposed to coordinate that through Brigham Young, but technically you had the ability to seal. And so when a person like Rulon Jeffs or some of those people, when they got excommunicated, they're like, I don't care. I've already had my second anointing. That excommunication means nothing to my priesthood. And since priesthood is separate from church, they could continue. And so it was the sealing power was very distributed among the fundamentalist Mormon communities. And so Rulon wanted to consolidate that back like the LDS Church does and Brigham Young. And so does that answer your question about one man rule?
Yes, it's just interesting that it's, you know, a woman couldn't have several husbands.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you there. I think that's okay. Well, I didn't ask David Fairman. I bet he would be okay with that, though. So he seems pretty open to everything, so long as God's involved.
And then
So
the consecrated societies.
consecration societies. So the idea, this is really an idea brought in by Sidney Rigdon, was, hey, let's turn all of our property over to the church, and then the church will redistribute it. There will be no poor among you. And so everybody's working together. And so consecration works differently in every society. So it's hard to give one answer to that question. And, you know, whenever they tried consecration in Kirtland or Independence or Nauvoo, it always failed. You know, in Kirtland, the bank blew up, and in Independence, Joseph came and everything blew up. And in Utah, one of the things they did was they had these united orders where there's a funny story about everybody was supposed to wear the same pants. You're supposed to have, so everybody dressed the same, looked the same. But I mean, the general idea of consecration is you turn all of your cars and TVs and houses and titles and everything to the church, and then the church gives you back what you need, and then you share as a community. And so in the days, in the Utah territorial period especially, a lot of the consecration societies had better economies than some of the non-Mormon capitalist societies, because they did distribute that. But and so even with like the House of Aaron out in Western Utah, they were very it's hard to do that. It's really hard to do that. Do you turn over your car title? And they finally said, you know what, we'll buy you a car, but we don't want the title. And so every group administers it differently. But the idea is everybody contributes to the whole, and there's no poor among you. I mean, that's the basic idea of consecration. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mark, go ahead, please, and then Frank.
Okay. Hey, Rick.
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, first
you
off,
coming to MHA, by the way, here in June?
What's that?
Are you coming to MHA?
No, I'm afraid not. I'm gonna
Okay.
have other travel plans for them, but no.
Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I'm looking forward to the John Whitmer and here in Texas. So
yes,
we'll
get together for sure.
I will definitely be there for that. And I wanted to confirm, yes, that Dave Fairman absolutely does promote multiple women marrying, women having multiple husbands. Yes, absolutely, he does. He's gone on record many times saying that. In fact, he even revised the Doctrine and Covenants section 132 to reflect that.
Does he do polyamory?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
So my question was, so in your encounters personally, have there been any personal prejudices you've had towards certain groups or individuals that that by meeting people you've worked through, that you've learned better than? And conversely, have there been any personal prejudices people have had against you for perhaps being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that you've seen or that you worked through by meeting with people personally?
So, I mean, as I think about it, I mean, growing up, of course, the LDS church was the one true church, and our LDS
for
church,
sure, yeah.
they were just, well-meaning people, but they just didn't understand, and that kind of thing. So I'm sure I was very condescending, especially as a missionary, although I didn't meet any RLDS people or anything, but I was very young and immature and that sort of a thing. But my podcast is 6 years old, and the previous 10 years before that, I was just diving in, and I remember so bad wanting to meet an RLDS person. I remember I met a guy named Daryl Holiday, and I was just like so thrilled. and then when I met John Hamer and Locke Mackay, it was like a dream come true. I mean, those guys are just awesome. And so since I've been on my podcast, no, I don't think I've really had any
Well, maybe you're more open than most people are.
Yeah, I think so. I've been more like excited to meet people, because I just call you guys. You guys are my cousins. Like, I just
Okay.
consider you all cousins. I mean, Mark, you're LDS, but we're brothers. But
Right.
but I am super thrilled to meet all of my cousins. And as far as prejudice against me, not really. I mean, I
That's
will
good.
say, it was kind of funny with Randy Sheldon. I love Randy Sheldon from the Temple Lot Church there in Independence. But I remember I know he had a spiel where he was like, okay, I'm going to read out of the Book of Commandments. I want you to read in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 20. We're going to read verse by verse, and you're going to see the changes. And I already knew there were changes. So and I think, so he was expecting me to be all surprised when the words weren't exactly the same. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not a big deal to me. And he was like, really? Like he was expecting a fight, I think, and I didn't give him one. And so he was like, you're pretty cool, So, yeah. So, but honestly, I think one of the things that I try to do with my podcast, especially, is I try really hard to be respectful. And to be honest, people respond to that. Like, people contact me wanting to come on because they know I'll give them a fair shake, and so, John Pratt asked to come on, and Matthew Gill asked to come on, and so because they know I give them a fair shake. And so, yeah, I think I've been able to avoid a lot of that prejudice because I try to treat everybody with respect. So
Cool. Well, thanks. That's my question.
yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Frank, and then Rick. And then Nancy, I see you got your hand up. We'll let you go after Rick, okay?
Okay.
Hi,
Go ahead,
Rick.
Frank.
This is Frank Fry. Just wanted to make a couple of clarifications, differences between what you were talking about, what takes place in the LDS compared to the RLDS, and I believe still Community of Christ. The baby blessings, baptisms, and marriages would not have to be cleared with anybody. You can have a marriage, a baptism at any time or any place, really. There's no requirements of that. Priesthood calls in the RLDS church, and I believe now the Community of Christ, they continue to be passed on. The call comes from the branch level, and then it goes on up to, back then it went to a stake or a district, and then on up to the first presidency, I believe. With the breakup of the restoration branches, they have, each one has kind of become an independent. They call them independent branches. They each act independently, like their own church, basically, which they shouldn't be, but they do. I don't believe that we can, really function right if we're that independent. Even though I'm a part of one of those independent branches. And by the way, our branch just bought one of the Temple Lot buildings here in Independence. And I saw Randy at the Temple Lot Church just the other day, and I picked up some literature there. They're good people.
Yeah, definitely.
But I thought you might want to make that clarification.
Yeah, I guess that wasn't the best analogy I used. But I do have a question for you though, Frank. So
Sure.
I'm a high priest in the LDS church, and if I were to join the RL or the Community of Christ, you would accept my priesthood and I would be a high priest there as well?
I kind of doubt that, but I'm not sure about the Community of Christ right now. There's been a lot of changes that have taken place there since 1984. That would not be the case in the Restoration branches, I know.
Yeah.
Paul might be a better one to ask that question to when we get finished here. But there's one other thing I just wanted to make clear to you. My family's been in the church since about 1831 in the Kirtland area.
Wow.
And we came to Independence, got kicked out, and wound up on the west side of the Mississippi River. And our family chose not to follow Brigham Young, mainly because of what they saw happening in Nauvoo at the time of Joseph's murder. And so, you know, and I've also spoken with a couple of different descendants of the Joseph Smith family, and they all believe that Joseph Jr. was not a polygamist, and that the Section 132 was a fabrication by Brigham and others around him. So that's, you might want to make that clarification in your presentation, that, you know, those of us who were, and you did make that one statement that the RLDS have always pretty much believed that Joseph was not a polygamist, and I hold to that myself. And if you look at first person presentations or things that were printed during the lifetime of Joseph, you can only come to that conclusion because everything he said and printed during his lifetime was against polygamy. So the Book of Mormon, of course, teaches against it. The 1835 Doctrine and Covenant taught against it. And all of his statements that were published during his lifetime were against that. So I really believe that there was a conspiracy at the time of Joseph's death that brought about those kind of things. So good talking with you, Rick. I appreciate your openness to all of the different varieties of the restoration. I've found a lot of good friends in the LDS church. I work with them all the time. Good people, and you're one of them too. So,
well, thank you. I feel bad because I know a lot of my groups were very Brighamite skewed because that's where I live.
Yeah.
If I lived in Independence and I want to get to Independence and I want to talk to a lot of the people from the independent branches, because
if you ever come here, give me a call. I'd love to talk with you.
All right. Well, send me
I'll
an
share
email
my family history with you.
Yeah, send me an email to gospeltangent@gmail.com and I'll look you up because I am coming to Independence. And I would love to talk to you. So that would be great.
If I could just jump in quickly, the Community of Christ would not recognize priesthood from other churches for people who converted.
Thank you, Robert.
That I'm positive of that, although
that's what my understanding was too.
Yeah, I do believe that there was a time in the RLDS era when there was some exchanging of priesthood authority between the Temple Lot and the RLDS, but I'm not.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that is that still going on with the RLDS and the Temple Lot Church? Is there still those?
No, it kind of stopped in 1925.
Okay.
Right. And that would have been wonderful if it had continued, I think, because I think most of us still went along with that, and I'd like to see that kind of thing.
Among the independent branches, can you transfer between independent branches?
In many of the independent branches, you can. The Joint Conference of Restoration Branches will accept the priesthood from most of any of the restoration branches.
Even LDS?
No, when I'm talking about restoration branches, I'm talking about the restoration branches that have broken away from the RLDS.
Okay.
Or were abandoned by the RLDS, let's put it that way, because that's the way we kind of feel about it. I know there's varying feelings about that, but it depends on whose side you are.
Right.
Really, what happened to you? Our particular branch, we had given the title to the branch to the general church, and when it came down to Nancy might have been there too. I don't know. You were down at that time, I know, living there. But they came down and closed down our branch and took the title away. And well, they already owned the title, but we lost our bank account and we lost the building and everything. And we were almost all of us put under silence because we didn't go along with what was going on up there. But, you know, we still get along with most people in the other branches, and there's most people in the community of Christ I would serve the Lord's Supper to.
So do you accept
differences.
priesthood from the community of Christ?
I would probably accept them to give ministry in our branch. I mean, I'm not the one that would make that decision, but you know, I wouldn't have a problem. We've had people from the Bickertonite group, from the LDS group, come into our branches and teach materials about the Book of Mormon. They're welcome there. In fact, we're trying to bring some kind of, we'd like to be able to agree on whatever we can agree on. Most of them, it's the Book of Mormon. We all believe in the Book of Mormon. That's why we're here tonight, because we all believe in the Book of Mormon. Well, most of us do. I hope so. It's a good thing to be agreed on, at least. And we all, I think probably every one of us here would believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord, and that he was born of a virgin. He came into the world to save us. So,
All right, who's next?
Your gospel tangents at what now again? Was it?
At gmail.com.
Just gospel tangents at gmail.com.
Right.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, Rick and then Nancy. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, thanks for your presentation, Rick. Wow. That just kind of made my head spin.
Me too.
Yeah, and it's probably not going to get, that tree is probably not going to get any smaller.
No.
You know, we got splits of splits of splits, you know, got frizzies in my hair from all these splits.
That's for sure.
I have a saying that goes like this: if you don't believe you're in the right church, you ought to switch.
Got a lot of choices.
Yeah, explore some options if you don't believe you're in the right church. So everyone should believe they're in the right church. My question is about the House of Aaron.
Okay.
I did some research on the House of Aaron when I was looking at the Levitical writing. I don't know if you're familiar with their Levitical writings and the source of them.
The source of them is Maurice Glendenning. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So basically, he had a bunch of revelations, and he wrote them down, and they're known as the Levitical writings.
Yeah. I thought he said they were like Elijah voiced the revelations.
So, you know, that's so funny because I confuse the House of Aaron with, there's a Church of Jesus Christ of the Elijah Message.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Correct.
Yeah, I met with those.
Yeah, and so I know Paul Savage, when I was out there in Independence, he was an apostle I think, because they've split a few times, and I think he's no longer an apostle. But Adam Stokes, he's agreed to an interview, and we just need to get together. He's an apostle for the Elijah Message. He lives in New Jersey, and we're going to get together sometime. Yeah, so when I interviewed John Conrad and I mentioned the Elijah Message, and he went off on the Levitical writings, because they are from Elijah, but it's different than the Elijah Message.
Yeah.
And so that was confusing to me, and I just know they're different.
Yeah, I chuckled at your response about the reliability or unreliability of Revelation that you made. Okay, I just didn't know if they still espouse the Levitical writing because it wasn't in your slide on the House of Aaron.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do. That you watch my interview and you can see that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they
they
definitely do.
You said that they left the Book of Mormon or don't use it anymore. I wasn't aware of that. This was, 10 years ago when I did some research on them, investigated and watched their YouTubes and all that and their consecration. Okay.
It's been kind of interesting because it sounds like, so John grew up in the House of Aaron, and his parents, I think, were LDS prior. And so it sounds, and also there's a guy we mentioned in the interview named Arlo Stevenson that lives in Independence. And Arlo personally believes in the Book of Mormon, but John doesn't, and John's kind of the leader. And so so I think there is a divergence of opinion within. I mean, they're not, the House of Aaron has, I want to say 3 or 4 communities in Utah and Idaho, and Arlo's a member and he's an independent, but it sounds like he's kind of, it's just his family. At least that's what I understand. Maybe there's more than that, but so I think within the congregation there is some diversity of opinion about the Book of Mormon, and I think even Maurice Glendenning was okay with it, but John told me he's got some problems with it. He says, I don't think it's from the devil, but I don't accept it as scripture. And so when I say the House of Aaron doesn't, John's the leader, and I'm kind of going with what he said. Wow. So
okay, well, thanks a lot for your presentation. That was interesting. I didn't realize there was so many splinters.
Yeah, I didn't even get 1% of them.
Yeah, and I suspect that people like talking to you because everyone wants to tell their story. Mm-hmm. And if you listen and give them a chance to share why they believe what they believe, then you're friendly. You're not argumentative.
Right.
Okay.
I try to push back a little bit, but try to do it gently and not in a way to offend. So.
Yeah, you say like, well, what about polygamy? What's your stance on polygamy? And they would tell you, okay, what's your stance on sealings or consecration, mm-hmm. And they tell you, so forth. Okay, well, I'll yield to the next person. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rick.
Oh,
Nancy, you're next.
Okay, all right. I had 2 things. One was a question, but I also had a statement to Steve and to Rick. I do appreciate your presentation. That was fascinating. And it is fascinating to see all the different splits and all different kinds of things. My question was the difference between you called it LDS splinters and Brighamite splinters. My other statement was that I take umbrage, not a lot, but some, with the statement made by, I think it was Steve, that the Community of Christ Church does not use the Book of Mormon anymore. That is not correct. We do. Yes, there are a few people who've allowed themselves to become ignorant and don't use it, but it is still considered scripture in our community of Christ, and is still used and it's still believed in. Some more than others, just like any other group. But back to my question, what is the difference between when you said some of them had exited from the LDS and some from the Brighamites? What is the difference between those two in the groupings that you
Not
had?
really. There's not really any difference. It's
Well,
just
I kind of
two
wondered.
ways to say it. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's kind of funny. My Christchurch friends, Benjamin Schaefer, he jokes that he's the true Brighamite and that I am a Grantite because he thinks that Heber J. Grant really changed things and that I'm following Heber J. Grant and he's the true Brighamite. So,
Okay. Yeah.
but that's mostly I mean, there's a little bit of seriousness to that, I guess, but yeah,
Yeah.
when I use LES Brighamite, those are pretty much interchangeable.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Okay, so we got about 4 or 5 people yet. Lori, go ahead.
Mine was just some personal observations to add to the conversation. My middle child joined the RLDS or joined the LDS church as a young person, and she went on a mission. And as she prepared for the mission, she grew up in the Community of Christ RLDS church. And she also grew up in a family where was a lot of punning and a lot of stirring the pot. And so as they were preparing to deal with their spiel as they went on a home visit, they had to set up scenarios. Well, she decided she would set up the scenario that she was RLDS. And so as they were asking questions, do you believe that Joseph Smith was prophet? She said, yes. And then they would, well, do you believe in the Book of Mormon? Yes. And so they were baffled and they didn't know where to go with that because so often they are not aware of all of these
absolutely
different people, and they didn't know they had a cousin that was closely related, and she was just smirking on the inside saying having fun with it. Also, my first name is Lorraine. It's a French name, and I'm betting that it's Verray, Texas as well, but I don't really know. But
Wisconsin.
Or Wisconsin, whatever it was. Yes,
Yeah.
I seldom see a name that's even close, and I would bet it's a French name.
Maybe I've always heard it pronounced Voree, so I don't know. I think even Bill Shepard called it Voree.
Yeah.
So
I appreciated your presentation tonight. It was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the mispronunciation there. Paul, you're next, please.
Well, thank you. I recognize that there's so many comments I'd like to get made, but the one that I think is most important is the invitation for all of you that are interested in the history and heritage. Our archaeological investigation at Nauvoo will be May 17 through June 17 this year. It's a great opportunity for grandparents to bring their grandkids and work with them and let them find some artifacts. We'll be working on the Times and Seasons site on the corner of Main and Water Street. The money has been raised for that to be restored, and so we've got to clean up the site to hopefully find the outhouse related to it. And there should be quite a lot of type left scattered there, although we excavated it in 1975 and found 572 pieces.
No way! That's awesome.
The opportunity is open, and I Dig Nauvoo is our webpage. If you'd like to sign in and and join us for a day or a week, you're certainly welcome to. It's a great opportunity for people to share together, and that's really where this forum came from, because when we started the I Dig Nauvoo project, we found ourselves working with Bob Smith, who is a descendant of Samuel, LDS, and a very fine gopher, someone who's helping to provision the whole project. We've had quite a number of people who are restorationists on the crew, and of course a few Community of Christ people. And then we've had Catholics and Protestants and the whole assortment of people. Matter of fact, when we were digging on the Battle of Nauvoo site, we discovered we had people whose ancestors were on opposite sides of that battle. And so I'm delighted that our crews have so far, well, sometimes we have to avoid some topics of discussion, but we've not had anybody kill anybody yet, and not to. But the fact is that that it felt to me like an expression of Zion, and that's why we started the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum, so that commonality could continue and we could have a taste of Zion every week. I thank you all for participating in that, and I appreciate the good humor and good attitudes that are brought to the session and that are expressed in the questions and answers. And Rick, I am very pleased with your presentation tonight. It opens up a lot of perspectives that people are interested in, and so I'll be quiet now and let other people ask questions.
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Paul. idignauvoo.com or .org?
.com.
.com, okay.
The webpage is run by Bob Smith, and there's quite a few errors on it. It's been reworked, but hopefully you can get registered if you care to. If you have problems with that, send me an email, debarthp@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to work it out so you can work with us.
Okay.
Okay, Monty, go ahead, please.
Well, I was kind of surprised when you were talking about the Community of Christ de-emphasizing the Book of Mormon. I was RLDS and now Community of Christ, and I still treasure my brethren in the restoration movement portion of the breakaway that they had happen, and fully recognize their priesthood authority. When I was injured in an accident at the store I worked at, I accidentally fell off a forklift, and they asked what I wanted done, and I asked them to send for a gentleman who was working at the store there, who was also a Mormon elder, and ask him if he would administer to me. And he was delighted to be able to have the opportunity to minister. But of course, they stood back and thought we were both crazy, but that's neither here nor there. But I really feel that I take my belief in not only the Book of Mormon, but when somebody becomes a minister, I take their calling seriously, because I believe that the Lord holds them responsible for their ministry, and it's not my place to decide whether or not they're valid. I am a extremely heavy believer in the Book of Mormon, and while I won't argue with anybody, I firmly believe in the divinity and the scriptural authenticity of the book. So it's just I was a little surprised when you were talking about how the Community of Christ seems to have watered it down because we use it regularly in our services.
Yeah, well, that was Steve. That wasn't me. So I'll let Steve know. Don't be talking trash about the Book of Mormon, the Community of Christ. From my experience,
and I love Steve too.
Yeah, from my experience, the Community of Christ there's definitely a difference of opinion on. Some people really love the Book of Mormon, and other people are like, it's fiction. So,
well, while I support it, I would not argue with anybody. I just refuse to get involved in petty arguments about it. I believe what I believe, and nobody can convince me otherwise.
Okay. All right. Ed, go ahead, please. Oh, you
it's
got
on
unmute,
mute, I think.
Ed. Ed, you need to unmute. Thank you.
Is that better?
That's
Much
much
better.
better.
Okay, well, that was very interesting, Rick. I have a couple comments. Number one, you mentioned that the Temple Lot people hold the title to that lot. My
That's only
understanding,
partially true, but yeah, go ahead. You're probably going to correct me, but go ahead.
well, from a legal perspective, I have a little different perspective because I know that there was a lawsuit between the LDS and the RLDS to quiet title to church property, and the federal court awarded title to church property, much of it, many of it, to the RLDS church. So how did the Temple Lot people get in? Well, there's a doctrine in the law known as the doctrine of open and adverse possession. Sometimes we call it squatters' rights.
Latches is what they called it there.
What?
Latches.
Latches? Well,
Latches, yeah, something.
If you don't, if someone else is on your land and holding it in open and notorious adverse possession to your interest, and you do nothing about it for a certain period of time, then latches applies, and you don't lose your legal title, but you have an equitable title that is given supersession in the law. And my understanding is that the Temple Lot people hold a squatter's rights adverse possession title.
Right.
But the RLDS Community of Christ Church actually holds legal title. I just thought that's.
I'm no legal expert. I do know that there's two cases. In fact, I know Brian Hales, in my interview with him, got them mixed up because there was a case where the RLDS church in Kirtland basically sued to get ownership of the Kirtland Temple, and they sued, I believe, I think it was Locke Mackay said in the lawsuit, it said they sued the quote unquote Utah church because they, and of course the Utah church was involved in all the polygamy prosecutions, and the last thing they had to do was deal with another lawsuit. So the RLDS church took the Kirtland Temple based on this latches, and I'm not a legal expert, but that's my understanding. Adverse possession, they've been taking care of it, sort of a thing. Now the Temple Lot case, I don't know all the legal issues involved, but from what I understand, the RLDS church won the first case to take the Temple Lot, and then the Temple Lot, with the help of the LDS church, appealed and won on the appeal.
Right.
And so that's my understanding of how that worked.
Oh, I'm unaware of an appeal that was successful.
Well, they won it on the appeal because they hadn't paid the taxes on it, and they lost possession of it. But the judgment of the court was that the RLDS church was the original church, based on the doctrine that they taught and the doctrines that were being taught in the LDS church at that time.
Yes. Ordinarily, a court will not intervene in a dispute between churches.
Right.
The only reason, well, the main reason that the federal courts got involved was that they had to quiet title to property within the jurisdictional confines of the United States. So that's why they had the court case.
My understanding of that was the whole argument about who was the rightful heir of Joseph Smith's church was the RLDS church was arguing Joseph never practiced polygamy, and the LDS church was arguing Joseph practiced polygamy, and the Hedrickites, the Temple Lot church, admitted that Joseph practiced polygamy, but they even though they rejected it, they were arguing that the LDS Church was right, and so the whole the case of, and it was more of a theology. I don't know that the court can decide a theology question,
No.
but the idea was, well, who's the real true heir? LDS Church is saying we are, our LDS Church is saying we are, and
That's my understanding.
I don't know how the court ruled on that, but
Oh,
yeah, my understanding was the RLDS Church won the first case, and the Hedrikites, the Temple Lot, won the second. So one on appeal.
I don't believe the Hedrikites won, but anyway, I had occasion back in the 1980s to represent a man by the name of Richard Price, who was excommunicated, tossed out of the RLDS Church.
And Joseph fought polygamy guy.
Yes, and that's when I got a hold of the federal court rulings, and I had to establish certain things in that regard. That's why I even knew about it. I don't. Religious law is not my specialty, but Richard needed someone to help him, so that's how I got involved. Anyway, I always thought that was interesting that you have these three contending parties: the LDS, the RLDS, and the Temple Lot.
Right.
And, by putting the equitable title into the hands of the Temple Lot people who didn't, as you pointed out, didn't have the money to build a temple, the Temple Lot is essentially sitting there. The Lord is waiting to see who's going to build that temple. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, I know the Temple Lot group. I've heard that they've always been a poor group, and the LDS Church has even helped them pay some taxes to keep them on there. So, by the way, I got to ask you, or tell you one other thing. I don't know how much of a genealogist you are, but I'm a genealogist, and I have some Founts relatives, so we might be related.
Really?
On the Bennett side. Yeah. So I don't know if you're into that, but maybe we'll have to see if we're related. So.
Well, I can tell you this: I have a great grandfather or great great grandfather by the name of Mark Foskett, who, for a period of time, held title to the Kirtland Temple as a favor to Joseph III.
Huh.
And I didn't know that until it was pointed out to me by one of my.
Do you go back to the 1830s Mormon? Are you, or I shouldn't use Mormon, Latter-day Saint, or?
No, not to the 1830s.
Okay. But 1840s?
Yeah, sure.
Wow, that's cool. Because the Bennett side, my dad was a convert to the LDS Church, and there were like Protestant before that, so I don't really have any ties.
I was also going to comment on the John Hammer, what do you call it? The
octopus.
There's something that's just a little misleading about that, or maybe a lot misleading, depending on your viewpoint. It shows it like a river flowing with streams get going off and so forth, but it's not that simple. People who want to return to the original Jerusalem gospel as taught by Joseph, they'll go to the Book of Commandments, and as you pointed out, they'll show you the Doctrine and Covenants. They'll say, look, they made changes. We're going back to the Book of Commandments, or whatever they say. They don't seem to realize that Jesus is the one who said, I'll build my church. And it was at the command of Jesus that the original church was rejected. The name of the original church was the Church of Jesus Christ. And it was named that way by commandment. And even the Book of Mormon teaches that in 3rd Nephi, when they asked him, what should we call the church? And he said, well, if it's Moses' church, call it Moses' church. But if it's my church, it's the Church of Jesus Christ. Now that name got changed. And around the same time that it got changed, there were changes that had to be made in the Book of Commandments because they were no longer under the celestial law. Joseph was forced to recognize that he had come down from the mount with the celestial law and given it to the saints, but they rejected it. And so the Lord said, there's a problem here. And so that natural flowing river that John Hamer built ignores the hidden history of the Mormon Church. And we do all share a common history up until 1844. And I have been so impressed with friends I have made in the LDS tradition who have done such wonderful work on the history of what happened, what they call the hidden history of the Mormon Church. And I think that one of the things that happened was the experience of Joseph in the Grove, and that story actually unleashed on the world a creativity and experimentation in the personal relationships with God. And the explosion of effort to understand and implement God's wishes has what has led to this, as you call it, 500 different applications, and the willingness of people to say, I have my own revelation, and the incredible willingness of people to say, I'll follow you. So we have this enormous burst of creativity, and we all make our decisions about what we will follow. But I do think that when we talk about building churches and having personal relationship with God, the one thing that is really crucial is you just got to have a lot of humility. Got to be real careful. And but I'll tell you, the study of our common history and what has happened is fascinating.
Sure is. It's kept me busy for 6 years.
You'll be busy for a lot longer.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, you are next, and then Frank.
Chris, I know it's late there. Thanks for staying up.
Oh, am I up?
Yes, your turn.
Rick, great job. Paul and Robert and Deb, thanks for all the things you do in this. It's always nice to drop in when I can. And Rick, you are such a nerd.
I know I am.
I really find myself wanting to go with you to all these places because I've visited a lot of them on my own and recognize, I think the first step in having an addiction, Rick, is to admit that you've got a problem. And so maybe we could do that together. Yeah. I'm reminded of a story I heard somewhere along the way about a man on a deserted island, and he's getting rescued. His rescuers asked him, what are those buildings on that island? And he said, well, there are 3 buildings. One's where I live, one's where I go to church, and the other's where I used to go to church. And so that's quite comforting to pastors to know that you don't even have to have 2 people to have a church split. Right. And so the other thing I was reflecting on was, my tradition. I mean, the estimates now are somewhere between 600 million and 680 million Pentecostals and charismatics. Imagine how many splits you can have with that kind of number.
Oh, I know.
right? I mean, it's it's amazing, isn't it? Just how all this kind of goes. And your presentation, Rick, was just really helpful. I don't have a question so much as just an affirmation, and thanks to the group for giving you this space. And thank you for bringing a lot of clarity to things. I mean, I've studied a fair amount on some of the movements, but it was really helpful. And I'm very appreciative to the hospitality offered to a complete outsider. And so thanks so much, and really appreciated that, and always appreciate the engagement. And if I can have more than one life, I will try to spend part of it at I Dig Nauvoo.
Yeah, we're gonna have to plan a trip for June for after MHA, I think, Nauvoo and Independence, and you and me and Steve. So maybe we'll get a conference call.
That'd be amazing. Thanks, Chris, for joining us. You're always welcome. It's good to see you. Paul, did you want to say something?
I just really wanted to affirm that I would be delighted to have you join us on the crew this summer. If not this summer, then we hopefully will be back for many years to come. But I really would like to be able to see you this summer and give you a chance to put a trowel in your hands and let you find some of that type from Times and Seasons.
That's amazing. Yeah, that sounds just too much fun. So I'm gonna make a good effort to get out here this summer, hopefully in June. I do know the MHJ is coming, and then I got AP test to grade, and so my first part of June's already busy, and maybe I'll have to get out there on a weekend in May or something. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, grade fast.
Okay, Frank, go ahead, Frank.
Thank you. Again, I'm always thankful that Paul has created this forum and enjoy when I can be here. And sometimes I just can't make it. And other times, several times I've just forgotten, and I'm sorry about that, Paul. But I wanted to point out that the suits, both the Temple lot and the Kirtland suits, were not just based on polygamy, which is doctrine, but they were also based on church structure, the succession of leadership, ordinances that were practiced in the original church, temple rights, and the concept of God in particular. So there's a lot more than just polygamy. Polygamy is a doctrine, but yeah, we disagree about that. And I don't know what your position, Rick, is about polygamy, but I believe that there's a lot of people in the LDS church that are not in favor of it. I knew in fact, a person that helped me with translation work when we lived in Mexico. Basically, a husband and wife team. I asked the husband about his position about polygamy, and he says, well, if the Lord commands us to do it again, I guess we'd have to do it. And then separately, I asked the wife, we were working on 2 different occasions here. I said, what's your position about polygamy? What would happen if the Lord commanded your church to practice polygamy again? Would you allow your husband to have another wife? And she said, over my dead body. So, but at the same time, I saw them in their branch, that same group down there, quoting from section 132. So a lot of variation in the LDS church. And as I see a lot of variation within the restoration branches and the Community of Christ, it's like the one guy that was on the island, that had 2 churches. Anyway, thank you. Oh, I wanted to make one other comment. Ed, you were quoted part of the Book of Mormon and you left out something. You quoted, if it's a man's church, it's, and Jesus said, if it's Christ's church, then the last part of that quote is, it's my church if it's named after me, if it's based on my doctrine.
That's right.
So don't forget that too. Anyway, thank you for your presentation, Rick. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with you here tonight. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate those nice words.
Okay, Monty, it looks like it's your turn.
Okay, she didn't sound all that enthusiastic there.
My
No, I
goodness.
just wanted to say that you were looking at the map of all the different schisms of the original movement, and what went through my mind is my family is a lot bigger than I thought it was. And you know, I mean, that's the way it affects me. I just see all of these folks that have taken it and gone with it in so many different directions. And when you look at a family tree, what do you see? You know, I mean, not everybody's the same on any given thing. You know, I mean, and I just really feel a warm sense there. I mean, I'm Community of Christ, but I'm also worshiping with a group of the United Christian Church in New Hampshire too, and they're my church family too. I love every one of them, and so it's just, you know, I mean, it really heartens me to hear of all of the different groups, whether or not I approve of the lifestyle. I mean, I've been married to the same lady for 50, well, almost 50 years, but I still don't understand her completely. And I'd be thoroughly overwhelmed if I tried for more than one. And
Me too.
I figure it's, you know, while it's an alien concept to me, I still don't cast people out of the family for believing that way. But it's just, you know, I just wanted you to know that it's been a very heartening experience for me to hear about it.
Well, thank you. And I'll just to mention, Ed said he didn't like that diagram. I think any diagram is going to have limitations, and John did the best he could with a very complicated.
I
think
didn't mind it one bit. I thought it was great.
You sense the complicatedness with the way the color scheme that it did. You can kind of see how complicated these are.
Well, you have to show me pictures.
Yeah.
I need things like that because I'm not really a complex thinker anymore. My wife says the only thing I'm a stinker, but I'm not a thinker. But it's just, you know, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated what you did, and I wasn't trying to shortcut the ladies in our church either. I love the ministry that is brought by the women in the priesthood in our church, and I really feel like I'm kind of sad because of in some ways we tend to minimize a whole section of people in our church that have just as much ministry to offer as anybody else. And we have ladies in our church that, I mean, I'm just in awe of the kind of ministry that they offer. Paul's wife is one of them, and she doesn't realize just how much I idolize her. But she's such a sweet, loving person. And
so, Monty, where are you at in New Hampshire?
Well, I'm not in New Hampshire. I together with another member of our congregation, worship with these people on Zoom. His brother lives in New Hampshire, and though he's technically Community of Christ, he can't find a congregation up there. So this is where he went, and he's very happy where he is right now. And I can see why. They're a wonderful group of people. And the lady who is the pastor of the congregation is one of these women that you don't want to get on the wrong side of. You know, I mean, she's a very spunky little fighter, and but she's got some really great insights. I mean, I really appreciate her point of view, and she brings a rich ministry.
Thanks, Monty. Hey, Rick, do you know on that that picture of John Hamer's with all the little circles, is there a significance to the size of the circles? Is that like the number of members, or is that not anything?
No, it is, because you'll notice like the Gordon B. Hinckley, that's the biggest circle. It does indicate some size, but it's not like all the small circles are the same size, whether they're 10 members or 1,000 members. So I mean, it does indicate some sort of size, but it's not super accurate.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? I don't see anybody's hands raised.
Raise mine.
Oh,
I did note that Josh Gailey of the Monongahela group left a message on the chats to thank you, Rick, for your presentation.
I need to get him on.
Had him on several times.
Yeah.
Just yeah, well, we've been very fortunate to be able to have a very good representation. I don't have anyone, I have not found anybody yet from the Strang group that has been willing and anxious to present. I'm looking forward to that yet one of these days.
Have you contacted Bill Shepard?
No, the irony there is that except for not having contact information with him, I absolutely agree. He's got to be the finest people and historian. So I'd like.
I'll see if I can hook you up with Bill. Yeah, Bill is just such a nice guy.
I've met him. He is an extraordinarily nice guy. Would like very much to be able to get him involved.
And I think he'd be very open to Zoom because I know his wife is suffering from dementia, and so Zoom would probably work out pretty good for him.
Well, we have still 30 people or so on the on face-to-face here tonight, and we're almost 10:30 my time, and so I'm going to sing, and that way we commonly shut things off in terms of the recording with the song. That doesn't mean you have to go away, but if you want to consider it a finished up session, then we'll call that with fat lady.
Is this the fat lady singing? Is that what you're saying?
Calling my wife the fat lady?
What? I thought you said you were singing.
They do that customarily at the end of each meeting.
I just remembered Dick Mata. It's not over till the fat lady sings.
Oh, there is a parallel.
Every time you guys do that, I think of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and the Happy Trails to You.
I will say that Paul has gained some weight since we last saw each other. In person, that is.
oh, we're not hearing you for some reason.
Bless you. All right. We sang through the other conversations.
I see.
Anyway, we would ask for the Lord's blessing for each of you, and may He give you peace and good rest. And may the conversation continue for those of you that still have something urgent you want to lay on Rick, or otherwise.
Thanks, Paul.
I do particularly appreciate, Rick, that you explained about the color coding there. I had not picked that up, and I had the book, and I understood that something about that. But your articulation of that explanation did help, and I really did appreciate it.
Yeah, I got that from John. So he's the wise guy there. That's for sure.
Well, we had him on a year ago. I sent an invitation, but he's slow to answer the request to come back again. We'll try to get him back on here soon.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Well, there are several people that were on this evening that were not the regulars, and I certainly hope that Robert, you're able to capture some more emails of people that want to be able to join with us periodically, and there should be some of those people. We had at least who was it? Cheryl Bruno was on.
Yeah, I was surprised to see Cheryl. That was cool, though. She's a good friend.
We want to get her on.
Yeah, I have her email address and one other, but I'll go back through the texts later and see if there are any others.
Fine, thank you. I see Logan Bolin and Rebecca Wolford names down here, people that I don't recognize, and so if you'd like to open up and recognize, tell us where you're from, you'd be welcome to do that.
Okay, I'm gonna bow out for this week, guys. I gotta be up before 5. So thanks again, Rick. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here, Deb.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.
God bless you all. Bye.